Hello and welcome to another edition of the Osteopathic Lyceum podcast. I'm going to speak through some concepts surrounding specifically the Canadian context of osteopathy, and obviously I'm in Ontario, so more so the Ontario context with respect to hands-on manual osteopathy. There are discussions that occur where people are curious, concerned, interested in the concept of regulation of the profession. I'll start off by saying I understand that some people have a preference and that they would appreciate if regulation came to them as professionals, but there's some honest to goodness issues. So to just sort of paint the picture, the general overarching picture of what may or may not be going on. So at least in Ontario, we have the Regulated Health Professions Act. That act sets up, essentially is able to generate the regulatory colleges. Now, that's not the perfect way to describe it, but in essence, the RHPA is the act that gives the opportunity for a profession to be regulated in healthcare and then set up a regulatory college in order to guide how that profession behaves, what it's allowed to do, what it's not allowed to do, stuff like that. Those colleges, those regulatory colleges, have taxpayer funding. The more colleges you have, the more taxpayer funding you require, okay? So you have to keep at least that macroeconomic issue in mind. If you want another regulatory college, it means you must pay more tax. Now, that's obviously a large macroeconomic type statement, but fundamentally, it'll hold enough water where if somebody tries to pick at that argument and say, we could do this, that, and the other, sure, creative accounting, creative solutions, I understand that those could exist, but fundamentally, if you want another regulatory college, you require taxpayer money for it, which means if you want another one, you need more money. The RHPA has to be open in order to accept applications. So there you will find varying places where osteopathic entities are suggesting that they are going to attempt to put forth an application to the government to regulate the profession. And what I will simply say to that is that the RHPA is not open. If it is not open, it does not accept applications. There you go. So fundamentally, there's nowhere for the application to meaningfully go for any action to occur as it stands. You need to have enough people in the profession in order for the government to have a concern that negative behavior writ large by people in that profession can really harm the public. The fundamental argument of regulatory colleges are that they are there to protect the public from the practitioner. As it stands, there's probably not enough osteopathic practitioners in Ontario, where there would probably be the most. Quebec may have a similar amount, but Ontario has a considerably larger population than Quebec, just on paper. So by percentages or by opportunity, there's probably more osteopathic practitioners in Ontario than there is in Quebec. And there's definitely more osteopathic practitioners in Ontario and Quebec than there is in any other provinces. There's not a lot of provinces in Ontario, or in Canada rather, that have large population anyways. So you're talking about a really small group of people in a country that it may not be valuable to regulate. So some provinces, it's just not valuable. There's not enough people. There's some provinces where there's probably well under 200 practitioners total for the entire province. That is not something to set up a regulatory college for. Even in Ontario, there's not a gigantic amount. There's less osteopathic practitioners than there are massage therapists. So just as, say, a relational concept. Now, I couldn't tell you the exact numbers of either, but there are considerably less osteopathic practitioners than there are massage therapists. So it's probably not an appropriate value proposition for the Ontario government to set up a regulatory college for osteopathic practitioners. The RHPA isn't open, as I said. That's kind of where that previous point came from. Also, if you consider recent government behavior with respect to healthcare professions, one of the most recent things that's occurred that's been large and notable is it was a very short-term thing, but there was a claim by the Ontario provincial government that they were considering deregulating traditional Chinese medicine. One of the rationales there seemed to be surrounding the ability for Mandarin and Cantonese speaking traditional Chinese medicine practitioners having some challenges with the board examination. Now, I believe the response to that was there was opportunities to write or have translation through multiple languages. Basically, the government's position was it is very challenging for Chinese people to become regulated Chinese medicine practitioners in Ontario. Now, obviously, there's arguments on both sides. That may have been a weak argument on the part of the government. Either way, the government showed at least some superficial appetite to consider deregulating a healthcare profession. Now, that's just painting the general stage. It doesn't mean one thing is going to happen or another thing is going to happen. But I've heard, and this is simply hearing from a few angles, that the government or that governments in Canada do not seem to have much of an appetite for regulating healthcare professions as it stands. They would probably rather dissolve the colleges and have the guidance for healthcare professions come through the legal system. Now, I've heard that. I do not know it to be true, but I know that I've heard it from multiple angles. So again, that's just sort of background information floating around that may be meaningless or it may be meaningful. It's hard to know. But we at least have one incidence where the Ontario government shows some appetite for deregulation. Other provinces, such as Alberta is starting to bring in regulation for massage therapy, but there, again, are considerably more massage therapists in Alberta compared to osteopathic manual practitioners. So there is movement for some provinces with respect to massage therapy to bring regulation in. So that's sort of counter to what I was suggesting with respect to governments maybe having less of an appetite to regulate. So there's stuff going in both directions there, as far as maybe an appetite for deregulation, maybe an appetite for regulation. With respect to massage therapy, it's unregulated in some provinces and regulated in others. So the provinces that are unregulated seem to have the general desire to become regulated for massage therapy. The same can't necessarily be said for osteopathy. So to go back to the RHPA, and re-note that it is not open. If the RHP were open and an application were to be received, the stakeholders in the profession looking for regulation require agreement. If there is not agreement between the stakeholders in the profession, then the application wouldn't move forward, right? What I will say generally is that if you look at the profession of osteopathy, there is a general lack of agreement on a lot of things. The agreed upon thing is the word osteopathy, the behaviors associated with that, the ideas associated with that, the approaches associated with that are not agreed upon. The view towards how you should run a business, the view towards what you should charge, the view towards who should be telling you what to do, this is not agreed upon. So it is a very messy environment in which it is currently highly unlikely that were regulation to approach, that it would actually be successful under the circumstances. There would be a long period of probably dramatic conversations between people within the osteopathic profession as to how it should occur. They're all going to be convinced that they're correct and that it should be their way. In that type of environment, there are probably errors that they're all committing, that they have no idea they're committing. They're just sure that they are correct and that the other people are not correct, or the other stakeholders are not correct. If you look through the information that I've put up through this Osteopathic Lyceum podcast, especially when talking about educational issues and the things like the WHO document, the CEN document, as far as those documents that guide education with respect to how the insurance companies view these things, because realistically what is occurring at the moment is that the educational institutions are leaning into the WHO and the CEN or CSA document because that's what somebody sold to the insurance companies. I don't know who sold it to them. I don't know why they sold it to them. I do know that I can confidently say that whoever sold those documents to the insurance companies as ideal guiders of how educational institutions should behave has no idea what they're talking about with respect to education. The WHO document, if you go back and listen to the first Osteopathic Lyceum podcast, I talk about the WHO document. The WHO document was created in a way or written in a way that it leans into hour counts for curricular development or curricular delivery rather. And they should have known at the time in 2010 that that was released, that that was incorrect, that that is a problem. The amount of hours that somebody spends on a particular topic does not indicate in any way competency. When you look at the adjustments made in the CEN and CSA documents, they talk about assessment approaches, which the WHO document didn't do. So I will give them kudos for starting to include assessment approaches. What they did is, as the secondary or the sort of non-highlighted or non-top tier approach to assessment, they put a competency portfolio, which is something that they should completely know better than. The competency portfolio is the thing that lives on top of all of the other assessment approaches. So whatever assessment approach is valid, reliable, and has strong utility would go into the competency portfolio. The competency portfolio is the assessment approach. It is the thing. So a competency-based approach to health professions education does not change the content that is delivered. It changes, and it doesn't necessarily change the delivery method, but it does change the assessment approach. Because what you're looking for is a consistent approach to figure out if somebody consistently performs at or above an acceptable level. So the CEN and CSA documents do not understand educational delivery. They do not understand appropriately assessment protocols. So if the people within the profession of osteopathy want to continue to lean into those documents as they stand and not adjust them to a more appropriate method of assessment and educational delivery, then they are carrying errors that if they've interacted with any of the stuff that I've done, that they should now know that they have or that they are committing. If they know that they're committing them and they continue to commit them and they continue to lean into the WHO, CEN, and CSA documents as they stand with no adjustment, then they're going to cause themselves issues in the future. Now, I can say that in most circumstances, the people that would probably be working within any approach to government regulation on the government side would have access to information about how you're supposed to deliver education. And if they do, then the prediction would be that the WHO and CEN and CSA documents wouldn't cut it. Now, it's not impossible that they would lean into them because maybe they also wouldn't know. But I can tell you superficially that as a stakeholder in the osteopathic profession in Ontario, if this process started to occur, that I would definitely be involved with it and I would definitely be talking to educational delivery, assessment approaches, assessment protocols, things of that nature, and how those would improve some things. I'm not going to sit here and tell people that they need to have different content. I can make the argument that they should have different content in their education, but I'm not going to tell them that they must. But I am going to tell them that the way that they're assessing people, especially with respect to the performance of osteopathic manual practice, has major issues. And if you are going to make an argument towards the government to say that we are going to, through best practices, keep the public safe, what you want to do is identify what the actual outcome performance of your profession is and test it properly and test it consistently. So I can say, again, with a reasonable degree of confidence, that the manner in which students are tested in the osteopathic profession could improve. So keeping that in mind with respect to regulation. Now, to maybe spin a clunky sentence, if you consider assessment processes and regulation and where we currently stand, so regulation's probably not coming. If you look to Quebec, there was news articles in the past talking about regulation may have been approaching, and then there was some funny business with respect to some student clinic stuff. You can find that in newspapers if you choose to, and in Quebec newspapers if you choose to, that the osteopathic profession has shown that the manner in which it will speak to the general public has issues. So if you're delivering information that is less than ideal, you're testing in a way that's less than ideal, you have an issue. Now, if I was to make an argument for what the osteopathic profession should do, it should clean up how it's delivering education, especially with respect to how it's assessing hands-on performance. And then it should pitch that to the insurance companies, because the insurance companies currently could be argued to be the de facto regulator as it stands. So what you would want to do is perform as a profession above and beyond what any regulatory college would ask of you. Do that for the insurance companies. Consider that there's not a lot of us. Consider that the governments probably have a low appetite for regulating the osteopathic manual profession, and move on with your day. So regulation probably not coming anytime soon. It's not impossible, but it's probably not coming anytime soon. The entities that say that they're preparing an application, there's nowhere to send it, right? So maybe they're trying to build a place to send it or build the appetite for somewhere to send it. But that just means they're likely engaged in some power games. They're trying to speak with politicians, and more power to them because it's something that they're interested in. But there's probably ways in which you could do a much better job of it and recognize that, having the underlying capacity to make a claim that everybody else would believe that your practitioners are competent would help, right? So obviously I have preferences. I have things that I'm very interested in. I'm very interested in educational delivery. I'm very interested in assessment specifically, and how you would do that meaningfully. Say, as a really quick thing that I can say, case studies don't count. Case studies don't test the actual delivery of osteopathic manual practice. They test knowledge in some ways, but probably not appropriate ways. What you really want to do is consistent hands-on manual testing, so oral practical testing. You could say OSCEs, you could say mini CEX, whatever you want to say, but you need to kind of get that in order before you try to get the government to do anything, because I happen to have some insight into people who have worked with government regulators on health professions. And I can say that they have particular concerns, but they don't necessarily know how to instantiate it and generate protocols that should make them more confident that the practitioner is less likely to harm the public. There's some things that you can't catch, right? So one of the things that government regulators are really, really concerned about is sociopaths, right? So the thing that you can't do with a sociopath is find them. They're very good at hiding. Like a good sociopath who's going to harm the public, very good at passing tests, very good at hiding. So, you've got some issues. But those are the types of things they're scared of, because they're scared of the practitioners hurting the public. But what you can do for sure is have testing that accurately assesses the outcome performance to prove across time with many, many samples that the practitioner is not going to behave in a way with respect to treatment that should harm the public. That's doable. So anyways, hopefully that didn't seem too disjointed, because I'm trying to sew a few things together. And the things I'm trying to sew together is the low appetite for regulation, from the government side, likely, the RHPA not being open, and the manner in which current osteopathic entities are behaving in a way that they probably don't know they're behaving with respect to education delivery and assessment, and how these things could all roll together to generate a situation where the osteopathic profession could be well prepared for delivering high quality care, protecting the public, and doing so either in the presence of or in the absence of regulation. Currently, in the absence of regulation, we could just get better and do some good things. When regulation comes, if it comes, which in any time soon, I doubt that it's on the way, we could be better prepared. So those are my thoughts. Hopefully, if you've listened this far, you took something from that. So thank you for listening, and we'll talk again soon.